This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
How big or small do you prefer your tabletop RPG source books?
Well, if you're hitting someone, I suggest they be really large.
Ed recently gave interviews to Polygon.
Very swiftly communicate a lot about a setting or a game or whatever by the art.
Realms bound.
Most of 5th edition has only been exclusively Forgotten Realms. They're not forgotten.
Boo! Boo! Muting!
The Stranger Things effect.
That Stranger Things has been a huge impetus for at least increased interest.
We have the Mystic subclasses.
Tend to make things more powerful than they're going to end up being.
All that and more right now.
Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the most edgelord tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms, because we're getting out all the cuss words this week. That's right, my name's Ben Byrne, and I am joined as always by Dael Kingsmill, Todd Kenrick, and Shawn Merwin. And Shawn, I'm going to ask you, how big or small do you prefer your tabletop RPG source books?
Well, if you're hitting someone, I suggest they be really large. Oh, you mean like for the content? I'm going to probably get hate mail for this, but I love the 3-book set with the books about 120 to 150 pages each, where you can do the source book, gazetteer, and maybe the player options in one book, do an adventure in the second, do monsters and GM facing content in the third book. I just like to be able to hand them out to different people. Here, players, you look this up. I'm going to keep this book here. I love that. And I think it actually might even help as a designer really get to the point of what do you want to make? What's best for your players? And think about that ahead of time.
Gotcha. Okay. Todd Kenrick, what about yourself?
I think that's great for dungeon masters, but for a player to expect them to buy an entire box set, including an adventure they're never going to read, or a dungeon master's guide supplement for that setting that they'll never read, is a tall ask. So I think both is the answer. Like, you want your players to be able to buy a player's handbook by themselves. And then as a dungeon master, yes, I love being able to buy all 3 in one box set. I enjoy that, but I don't think it functions very well for a player who doesn't necessarily need to know how to run something like Spelljammer, right? But I mean, those 2024 core rules, that's about as lethal as those books are going to get. I mean, they're thick. So Eberron, I just got my Eberron book. Very, very skinny little boy.
Yeah. They're going back and forth, aren't they?
I think I don't want a book necessarily any thicker than the 2024 core rule books. Those things are maxed out. They're big. They're hefty books. and I'm not complaining, but like, I think that's big enough. So.
Dael Kingsmill, what about yourself?
I love that we have all gone, well, if the book's really big, we can use it to perform violence upon our enemies. I posted just the other day about I received my Draw Steel books, and my immediate thought was I could fend off an intruder with this. But no, I think when I started out, when I was first breaking into the hobby, I had very strong feelings about this. I wanted all of my content to be in one place. I wanted it to be friendly for the players, but also have everything the Dungeon Master needed. It was a big deciding factor at the time for me going with Pathfinder rather than Dungeons & Dragons. And I found it really difficult as well to understand which books I needed for 4E D&D at the time. So it was just like, give me the one book, the one core book that gives me everything I need. And I was a big fan of just one big fat core book. But now that I'm like actually ensconced within the hobby, I think that I don't have as strong feelings about it. I love an itty bitty little 1-page RPG. I love those. I love a little zine. I love the kids on bike size, the sort of dread size, your little A5, is that what that is? Size book. But I also love the big fancy end. I love a book that I can fend off intruders with. So I don't know. I don't think I have a preference anymore now that I'm fully in it.
Yeah, fair enough. I was in a game shop just 3 days ago. I don't know the exact number of days, doesn't matter. But anyway, I was in a game shop a couple of days ago and I did spot Forge of the Artificer and the Forgotten Realms books. And I looked at them and I was like, yeah, they are a little skinny. I'd heard that online and they look like they're maybe like 120 pages each, somewhere in that vicinity, which seems a little lean to me. And that seems to be the approach at the moment. Maybe I don't think we've had enough releases to call it a rule at the moment, but that seems to be the approach that Wizards are taking currently to their setting source books, is kind of leaner, just what you need in the box, nothing more than that. But really, you should be bolting that on as an expansion to the player's handbook rather than it being a standalone kind of thing unto itself.
It's the setting and source book part of that is the key, right? Because how much content do you need to run an Eberron campaign? If you're just talking about a specific thing, I don't need to make my own Eberron campaign. I don't need an adventure, but I might need the player content and I might need the monsters. And so that's why I was talking about the different books to feed the different sides of the screen.
Yeah.
I think it helps people in different ways when you're looking at I find it a little paralytic when I see a campaign setting that has too much information, because then I feel like I'm getting something wrong. Eberron by design with Keith Baker and everybody else who worked on that, which is a considerable amount of people, by design is you get to bring something to it. They never answer things like what the calamity is and stuff like that.
Sure.
They give you kind of a sense of what each of these environments are, but it's not necessarily so locked in hardcore that you can't make it your own. Certainly they've got all the houses and all that stuff, and those are very specific, but I think even with back in the day in the second edition, when they tried to go too hardcore in the source book stuff for Dragonlance, they might get something wrong. And that book wasn't super thick. I don't think we need setting books that are that thick. I think that becomes kind of unfun, and then you're not imagining or daydreaming about the setting. That's great if it's a lore book for just you. If I'll buy a big Lord of the Rings book. It's about a Labyrinth book, but I think, does that serve the tabletop game? Not necessarily.
Yeah, I suppose I think about the Grim Hollow Player's Guide and our approach to that, and the Player's Guide in particular is thick with content, right? It's got 40 subclasses, it's got a new class, it's got new species, it's got the transformations, it's got new spells. So it's got a lot of stuff that, honestly, looks good on a Kickstarter. That, when I look at Forge of the Artificer, it doesn't have a subclass for every class that there is in the core game. And I appreciate the approach of less is more, and you only need what you need to be able to play in Eberron. But I feel like the identity of a setting, more so than the lore sections, really comes through in the subclasses, in the toys that are in the box, the species, etc. And so from my perspective, I feel like if there's not at least 12 subclasses, it feels like an incomplete setting in a weird way. And I know that's not fair, but it feels like what does a bard look like in this setting? Well, if a bard looks like what it looks like in the core handbook, well, then bards are no different in this setting than they are from the Forgotten Realms, from any other kind of core setting in my mind, right?
No, I agree. I agree completely. Yeah, you're right. Those become touch points for everyone to live out their fantasy and also understand how that world functions.
Yeah, exactly. It's you need to be able to communicate the lore through the toys in the box rather than just the kind of manual of lore, which is nestled up the back of the player's guide for people who are interested.
And that prevents homogenization for a setting like Dragonlance can be the last Dragonlance book. I'm not knocking it, but it's I would never let a Warlock be in the Dragonlance setting necessarily, or a Sorcerer, because it's just weird to have. So I would have rather had a lot more Wizard subclasses or Dragon Rider subclass or a bunch of other things like that were very specific to that setting to flesh it out, because there's some settings that just don't make sense to have certain classes or subclasses, and you would lean harder into something else, to your point.
Well, speaking of different size books, what do you think, Ed? Ed Greenwood recently suggesting that the smaller size of tabletop RPG source books are a sign of corporate interest taking priority, and pointed at Forge of the Artificer as kind of a evidence of this. Ed recently gave interviews to Polygon, kind of promoting his own product that's coming out this year called Realmsbound, which we might talk about in a moment. But the interesting parts of this that I thought was Ed talking about the size of supplements, from these days to kind of the mid-2000s all the way back to TSR days, which I think is really where he's comparing them to, suggesting that by contrast, bigger tabletop RPG books give players everything they want and need, rather than just kind of a taste of a setting. And the other interesting thing that I pulled out of this interview was Ed suggesting that art has pushed the text out of RPG books over the last 30 years, and that art has become an easier selling point from a corporate perspective than the words that are in a tabletop RPG book. And I think, again, from a Kickstarter perspective, it is absolutely easier to sell you on the vibe of a book with the artwork than it is necessarily the text. I don't think one pushes the other out necessarily, but what do you folks think? Dael, you are muted.
Boo! Boo! Muting! Boo! I didn't do that to myself. No. Boo. No, I was just going to say, I think the other thing is that as far as communication goes as well, there is some truth to the old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words. You can very swiftly communicate a lot about a setting or a game or whatever by the art. You get a really specific impression of what Mothership is as a game because of what the art looks like compared to, I don't know, Fiasco and what the cover of Fiasco looks. Although Fiasco was a bad pick because there's not that much art in the Fiasco book. A different game, you know? I don't know, the difference between D&D's art versus even like specifically like Wizards of the Coast D&D products for just Forgotten Realms versus Grim Hollow art. You know what I mean? It says something different. It says, if you want this kind of game, this is the kind of game we have. And then that can lead people into looking at the words, but I think it's sort of a balancing act because I think it's true that a lot of that does serve the sort of the marketing or advertising quality where you are selling this product to a person who's glancing at it and going, am I interested enough to spend more time looking at it? And I think that is true, but I also think that it serves a significant portion of just communicating the setting, because if you give someone 2,000 words to read about a setting, that's a lot. It's a lot.
That is. I agree. Shawn, do you have a preference? I feel like you in the past have expressed a preference for like more words than art, if it has to be a dichotomy like that.
I've said this so many times. I am not visual. I can read a book and someone will say, did you see the amazing art on page blank? And I'd be like, there's art in the book? I don't remember any art in the book because my brain just goes immediately to that place. But I do understand the draw of art and the need for it because of the wide variety of mental capacities and the ways people think and learn and understand that it's necessary. So I don't begrudge it. It's just not the way I think.
Sure. I mean, I'm a really visual person, like almost kind of the opposite. The more you can show me what something looks like, the more excited, I get about it. And to Dael's point before, I think the artwork for 5e 2024 shows that jump between even 5e 2014, where they went from kind of like D&D flavored but more classic fantasy style artwork where everybody for the most part had their feet on the ground and it still had a little bit of like old world fantasy about it, to fantasy as filtered through the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a lot of their 2024 art with characters floating up in the air and there's bright colors and there's heavy saturation, and even the darker, kind of toned art pieces are still very vibrant in their color, communicates what they want the game to feel like when you play it. And I think we talked at the time that there's a lot of discourse around like, does this make me excited for 5e 2024? Is this the way I want my D&D campaigns to look and feel? But that said, it still gets you like, it gives you a really clear picture of what the different classes or subclasses are meant to look like, and also inspires ideas. The one thing that I think is great for artwork in source books in particular is inspiring either character concepts or ideas for adventures where it's like, oh yeah, that is a cool scene. What if I did something like that?
Yeah, going back to Ed's point, the AD&D books had very little art, and the art it did have was very black and white, line drawings. And so while it was still evocative, it didn't get the attention that the art gets in books currently.
Yeah.
I think it's, so I disagree about the art. First off, like, I know you've already probably made these points. I think it really helps people understand subclasses and classes. I know the art direction specifically for the 2000 core rule books were supposed to be that they kind of were in the middle of a scene or an action sequence to further explain spell components or classes or subclasses. But like, I have the Elven Handbook from AD&D, and this was very common. There is tons of art in this actually, and full art too that's been actually recycled from previous books. Like Kiara, for reasons unknown, is in the book of the Book of Elves because Dalmar's in there somewhere getting the crap kicked out of him. So there's a lot of that. I mean, there's certainly not as much, but there's plenty. I don't think it's pushing out game design or lore. I think it's the best way, especially in a world where I come from video games where, hey, we got B-roll and I can talk to you about something with B-roll. Every class and subclass should have art, let alone one piece of art. It should have multiple pieces of art, in my opinion, because like it's so hard to explain, especially for someone who's new to understand a game. If it's just walls and walls of text without like a frame of reference, art is a educational tool for folks to understand what a lot of these things are. So I don't think anyone's buying extra art to fill up a book. I think that's just not true. And I'm always happy for art. More art in D&D is a great thing. So
going to say that I think that we've reached a point as well where there is enough of an audience for TTRPGs that we have a better understanding of what the balance of art to words looks like in terms of like making the ideal product that will sell but also get the information across and all that. There's just a lot more research into that. And that research says things like you should have at least half a page of art every X number of pages. You know what I mean? Like people have figured that stuff out now in a way that information just wasn't available to us in the early days when there wasn't as much of an audience, there wasn't as much audience research to look at. And maybe that sounds cynical when I say it, but I think it's just a sign of popularity and understanding and learning and developing and honing this medium. And I mean, I think there's something to be said for the question of how has something like the success of the art format for the 2014 5e books specifically, has that impacted the way that people expect, for example, fantasy TTRPGs to present their art? I know that there was a lot of discussion when the Draw Steel books were first released in PDF form. They didn't do fancy, watercolor borders on their art. They just put a piece of art there that had, hard borders. This is the edge of the artwork. There it is in the thing. And a lot of people reacted actually quite strongly negatively towards that. And is that a result of the way that art is presented? And does that have an impact? But I agree. I don't think that it's necessarily pushing out game design and taking that space away from game design.
I have the Dungeon Master's Guide for Advanced 2nd Edition. This is my DM guide. And this is how thin it is. This is the Dungeon Master's Guide now.
Right.
Can you tell the difference?
Is it
One
all the
of
art
them
that's
is
in
bigger
there?
than the other. Just a little bit. This is actually about Eberron sized. I'm not. It's dangerously close, right? Like, you know. So and sometimes you could buy supplements like this in D&D. This is Van Richten's Guide to Vampires, and it's not even a hardback, and it's that thin. And I love this stuff. I actually would like to see smaller format stuff, personally. Fair. Monster Manual's still chunky. This is the 2nd edition one. It's still huge. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Alpeggio asked a question in the chat about what art should be used. Should it always be characters in action? Should there be mundane scenes? I think, first of all, Todd said a moment ago there should always be subclass art. One thing I will say is I think if you're doing a monster manual, you really need art for every monster in there because for its usability as a book of monsters, when I flick through a monster manual, Grimhollow Monster Grimoire, that doesn't have art for certain art pieces, that monster may as well be invisible to me because I can't, like flipping through a monster manual that you've never flipped through before as a GM is like a Christmas tree with presents underneath it, and every page is unwrapping a new present. And if you don't have art, it's difficult to even visualize the monster sometimes when it's like it has a long neck and a triangle shaped head and its eyes pop out the side, and it's like, what does this thing look like? But it also doesn't stick in my head as a monster to come back to if there's no art there. So monsters should always have art, in my opinion. To answer the other aspect of Alpeggio's question, it kind of depends on where in the book it sits. So in the Grimhollow Player's Guide, towards the start when we were looking at species, if you flick through the heritage traits, the direction was let's have the different species of Grimhollow very clearly demonstrating their traits. So the Laneshi, the fish people are swimming in the deep ocean. A Wolven, that's like a werewolf person, is climbing a tree to show that they can climb. Once you get to kind of the art that introduces the classes, we used a group shot of a bunch of characters showing off their class features. The fighter's swinging a sword. The mage is casting a spell. So the art tells a story along with the words to get you excited about what you're reading and give you a visual idea, but also to help kind of reinforce what's being spoken. So it depends, is the answer. Speaking of books, Ed Greenwood is also putting out, and this is not just a promotion for Ed Greenwood, because there's a fascinating aspect of this that the number 2 podcast in all the realms, Mastering Dungeons, pointed out last week. Ed Greenwood is releasing their project, which they are calling Realms Bound, which is set in the Forgotten Realms. 4 books will be published in 2026. All of them focused on the Dael lands. Get your comments in the section below. Those 4 books will be a regional guide, an insights book, which will be focused on social encounters, a dungeon delves book, and an adventure book, which will be published across the year. And Ed has said that they plan to publish another 4-book set each year, all focused on a different region of the Forgotten Realms. Now, this is not being published by Wizards of the Coast. And how does Ed Greenwood publish Forgotten Realms content if he's not the current owner of the setting, legally speaking? Well, Ed Greenwood is publishing it through the DM's Guild, where you are allowed to publish Forgotten Realms content via print on demand. But because it's the same company, it's also going on to Roll20, and it's going on to D&D Nexus, which the snake is eating its tail all over again. This is kind of strange to me that we will have like Forgotten Realms content on a D&D Nexus virtual, it's not really a tabletop, but like digital character sheet way of accessing content that is very similar to D&D Beyond. Product identity, anyone? I don't know. I just find this fascinating.
They don't have a character builder on Demiplane, do they, for D&D, though? They just have the ability to view your published content, right? Am I wrong?
Shawn, you are
Shawn's muted. Boom!
We're playing the muted game.
Boom! Muting!
At this point, they do not have a character builder specifically for D&D. However, there are links that don't work yet on drop-down menus that say things like character builder. They do have a character builder for a bunch of other games, so they know how to make a character builder. So the question is, if they do make a D&D character builder, will that be allowed to be put on a character builder? The only reason that they can have Forgotten Realms stuff on D&D, not D&D Beyond, DM's Guild
You're already getting confused.
Is because they have an agreement with Wizards. And then Demiplane was purchased by One Bookshelf, which owns, right? So it's this weird thing going on that we don't know. Maybe it's all a bit ready, settled, and done, and there's nothing to see here. But it's a very interesting sort of business-related concept as groups buy other groups and have contracts that may or may not go across different products.
I have to assume, since 5e Nexus got rebranded to Dungeons & Dragons Nexus, there has at least been another conversation with Wizards of the Coast here, because you can publish Forgotten Realms content on the DM's Guild. You can't publish Forgotten Realms content on Drive-Thru-RPG, which is owned by the same company, but they're kind of two branches, two separate marketplaces to kind of delineate. You can use certain official D&D content over on the DM's Guild. You can't on Drive-Thru-RPG, but you can publish your own sort of IP content. Third-party companies like Cobalt Press and Ghostfire Gaming, and I assume MCDM use Drive-Thru-RPG as a marketplace as well. So like the fact that I have to assume that original agreement was specific for the DM's Guild. They have to have had a conversation, right? Like, they couldn't just assume, that license will extend to all virtual tabletop or, digital platforms that we now own as a company.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You can't just buy a company and then get digital license for the other companies within, or on the whole. I don't know if they even make sense for their business model at D&D to like let other people make character builders that are not D&D Beyond.
Well, this is a fascinating thing, right?
That was the major aspect of the whole OGL debacle, though, was them trying to tamp down on that and say you can't do that. But the OGL, as originally written, does allow for it. So it's a little. I'm hesitant to speak on it without revisiting the specifics with regards to this. But I think very specifically, depending on the content contained within the character builder, they might be skirting a line here where it is technically allowed. They might be, but again, I would need to
because
look
a character
into specifics.
builder, in a sense, is a device or it's.
There's
being
a
able to have
question
a
mark
character
over
builder
what
is
it
not within
is.
the OGL. Yeah, so I suspect that does not cover the use of a character builder.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's.
But this isn't even character builder type stuff. Is what we're talking about. What we're talking about is 4 lore books, essentially, like an adventure book, a lore book, how to have social interactions in the Forgotten Realms book, which I'm not quite. That's a lot. As someone, and I'm not knocking the Forgotten Realms, everybody, but most of 5th edition has only been exclusively Forgotten Realms. They're not forgotten. Not even close, because almost every book until the first Eberron book that was 5th edition was exclusively Forgotten Realms, and then only near the tail end of 5th edition 2014's, rule format did they start exploring Dragonlance or Spelljammer right at the tail end. So we've just been in Forgotten Realms. We've got a Neverwinter adventure semi-campaign setting, really. We've got a bunch of stuff. And certainly there are other realms within Forgotten Realms, but Forgotten Realms is kind of like a catch-all generic fantasy area, right? Like this is every type of medieval fantasy you could possibly conceive of all slapped together in one continent. But whereas like Dragonlance has a very, very extremely distinct identity, right? Eberron has a very extremely distinct identity, Spelljammer, things like that, and all these other settings. I feel like Forgotten Realms has been strongly explored. So I think this is for very huge, massive Forgotten Realms fans.
Sure.
I think 4 books a year is a lot.
Yeah, and Ed said the goal is to drill down on specific parts of the realms that haven't necessarily been covered already in
which there are plenty,
books.
yeah.
And to be clear, Ed is working with another group called Mythmakers to work on this. So it's not just Ed; it is a large team. And in fact, on the second most popular or the second podcast, Elder Realms, this week we actually interviewed one of the members of Mythmakers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Savannah Houston McIntyre, who is the lead designer and the marketing manager for Mythmakers. So we talk a little bit about this product on that show.
Is she pulling out her hair because Ed's like, no, less art for the marketing?
We did not bring that up.
Fair enough. So that's the Ed Greenwood news for this week. And speaking of Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast are currently the company that publish that IP. And they have had a few more kind of staff movements. We mentioned, obviously, James Hake is now over working for them. At the same time, was hired another excellent designer, Leon Barilaro, has been hired by Wizards of the Coast, started at the start of the year. Leon, if you're not familiar currently, you probably are familiar with their work from somewhere. They're Emmy-nominated game and narrative designer with credits at MCDM, Renegade Game Studios, Ghostfire Gaming. They've been all over the shop. So, yay.
Yeah.
Hooray. Hooray.
Absolutely.
Also, Aaron Roberts announced.
There you go.
Oh, Aaron has? Okay.
Aaron announced publicly. Yeah.
Good. I've been waiting to hear of that one.
This was her Blue Sky post. I've joined Wizards of the Coast as a game designer for Dungeons & Dragons. Much love to everyone who has been part of my journey through TTRPG writing and design land so far. Excited to see what this next chapter brings. So, congratulations to Aaron as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as Teos said on the number 2 podcast in All the Realms last week, there appears to be kind of a run on designers getting hired up by, so that's 3 new designers hired on at Wizards of the Coast at the moment. We don't know, none of us know, but what do we suspect they may be gearing up for? This feels to me like they're trying to gear up for content for 5e 2024, adventure content and things like that, because these designers, as far as I'm aware, are really known for their adventure writing and design.
I don't know about gearing up because they've been missing so many people, and I think it takes considerably long for companies like Wizards of the Coast and D&D to hire people.
Sure.
So the fact that Chris Perkins was gone, Jeremy Crawford was gone, I don't think those roles were filled. Certainly people were moved into those roles from the existing team. But then Ron left as well. Several people had left that org. So I think they had the absence of a great number of designers, and those roles have been filled. So I don't know if it's gearing up as much as they desperately need more help because they didn't have the proper staffing, and that takes so long to go through the vetting process of hiring someone, especially at a company like D&D. It's just going to take months. Plus, 1,000 people are going to apply for those jobs. So yeah, it takes a long time. It wasn't like they had a replacement for Jeremy Crawford the next day, right? It just that doesn't happen.
In the experience of the 3 people in this conversation who've worked in the vicinity of adventure publishing, how long is the runway for an adventure? From, hey, we're going to do an adventure, let's start pitching ideas, to release. How long is that?
Long, because
how long's a piece of
look
string?
At the publishing of it. If you even get the PDF done, it's going to take another 6 months to even get a physical book out. So, because that's just the publishing industry, you're working on the adventure at least 6 months ahead of that. And if something doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I can't remember necessarily how long I knew about Witchlight and all that stuff. But I mean, it's always longer than everyone at home thinks. They're like, hey, why didn't we get this sooner? I'm like, you don't want it sooner. it's also physically impossible because it's a physical product. And there's also only so many publishers in the world right now, and considerably less than there used to be making books. So, I mean, it could be 2 years.
Yeah. It also depends on the resources of the publisher that are doing it. I suspect that like the process of a lot of third-party companies is probably shorter than Wizards of the Coast would necessarily have. But I would say from like first concept ideation through to like, if you don't count the like Kickstarter process, but just like when we have physical books printed and getting on boats, it's maybe a year. And that would be quick. Like you'd be moving at a clip to get it done in a year.
Yeah.
Depends on how much playtesting you want to do for it as well.
And speaking of the size of the books and the art, sometimes the size of the book can cut down on production time if you make a 120-page book instead of a 256-page book. And when you do the art, if you are trying to put a half page of art on every 2 spreads or every 4 pages, and you can't start that art until you get the copy in, then that's going to push out your process. If you have the art done beforehand, you can shorten that, because then the writer knows what they're writing toward, which can be very helpful, but that takes planning ahead of time, which is another few months of adding to the process. So every company is going to be a little different, as people have said. But if with a 256-page book, even something that's easier like an adventure, you're talking a year and a half to 2 years if you want it done really well.
Yeah.
There are some huge issues that could come up in adventure content that I've seen. If you rush something, it can be a nightmare. Also, the concepting phase, which sometimes things get added in adventure books because the concept art came in and they were inspired by that concept art and they adjust. And people don't always know that the concept art can have a dramatic effect. Like when Richard Witters was there, he'd draw something really cool and Chris would be like, shit, now I'm going to add this. I'm not to plug my wife and I, but we're obsessed with weird gnome shit. And so there used to be Spelljammer gnomes basically with little laser guns. But cool. We thought of like, what if there was a squiddling one that was like, its tentacles were longer and had tiny little feet. So my wife drew it and we posted it on Twitter, this silly idea. And then Adam Lee drew it and then Richard Witters drew it. And this is all on social media until Chris Perkins saw it. And I talked to him about it. He's like, I know where this book is going to be. Where this monster is now going to be official D&D. And the gnome squiddling entered into the Neverwinter book, Rime of the Frostmane. And that is my Megan's baby. Tentacles longer than and with little toddler feet. So concepting phase is important, everybody. Sometimes you'll come up with a whole section of an adventure because something is ugly cute.
Well, speaking of things that didn't get past the concept stage, Cale Stutzman, who is known to have been one of the co-creators with Chris Kao of Project Sigil, has left Wizards of the Coast, no longer with the company, as announced via their LinkedIn account. Chris Kao had left Wizards last year, back in August of, I said 2016 on the run sheet, but that's not correct because that would have been many years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from, but yeah, so they have both departed the company, probably suggesting, I mean, I know Wizards already announced that they're no longer in active development on Sigil and it's kind of a retired project, but also seems like they've really, aside from D&D Beyond and Maps, moved away from the heavy digital future of D&D, so to speak. But good luck to Cale Stutzman wherever they land. They have not announced yet.
Yeah, super nice person. Every interaction I ever had with Cale is like super enthusiastic, hyper energetic, incredibly smart. So yeah, I hope he gets to land on his feet because super talented guy.
Well, stranger things have happened. Such as the Stranger Things effect, which again, speaking of stealing news from Mastering Dungeons, I went and had a look at this because I thought it was quite fascinating. The debut of Stranger Things, this is kind of what's being asserted. The debut of Season 5 and the conclusion of Season 5 has seen a considerable jump in the number of D&D searches and sales. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Shawn. It didn't seem like there was a lot of super hard data on this. I went and looked at Dave Clark's blog, the Full Moon Storytelling blog, where he was kind of looking at some light data that connected jumps in D&D search terms around the release of Stranger Things seasons. But then I went and looked, Bob Worldbuilder actually put up a similar video supporting a lot of what Dave's blog said, and quite compellingly shows a large jump in Google shopping trends that particularly have exploded for D&D since Stranger Things Season 5. And what's interesting about those in particular is that they far outpace any sort of jump that Baldur's Gate 3 brought to the hobby, and even the D&D movie. I think the D&D movie was actually slightly higher than Stranger Things in terms of like search interest. But it's just fascinating that Stranger Things continues to be kind of a driving force, more so than Critical Role, more so than almost anything else for new folks coming into this hobby. Would you agree, Shawn? Is that all fair to say?
Correlation does not necessarily mean causation, but the way that Bob World Builder presented it does make a compelling case that in all of these touch points in popular culture where D&D has come to the fore, that Stranger Things has been a huge impetus for at least increased interest, if not increased sales. And Bob goes all the way back to like the release of 4th edition and the release of D&D Next and the release of 5th edition to look for how searches were affected by that. And there was always the most tiniest of bumps and then flatline and flatline and flatline. But the big ones have been the release of each season of Stranger Things. And in fact, the most recent, the 5th season, if you look at the chart, it just precipitously rises with the launch of the new season. So we don't know if that will continue that trend, but it's definitely noticeable when you zoom out on that chart and see this one spike right at the very end of this month.
I haven't seen I think I briefly saw the charts. I will say I think the number of people who watch Stranger Things about the player's handbook is very small. I think maybe they're buying the box set in a collector's mentality.
Sure.
I don't know that we don't have full access to the sales behind D&D book products, and I think so it's a little bit of wild speculation. I think long-term Critical Role has actually advanced the purchases of D&D books very strongly. Stranger Things certainly has absolutely made it part of the pop culture lexicon, but like I don't know how many people they don't even necessarily know what book to buy, right?
Sure.
I think a lot of the box sets, maybe what was left of the box set stock may have been purchased in that time, or D&D related items, because that's a broad, I guess I just need to look more at the data.
Yeah, that's why.
Well, this isn't sales. This isn't sales. This is...
Yeah, of course D&D is being searched.
Right.
Right, exactly. I mean, because some people are just like, well, is that how sorcerers work? Like some people are like, okay, well, what does it mean that she has Dimension Door as a cleric?
Vecna.
Yeah, a lot of that.
Right. Yeah, and so that's all they're looking at.
Yeah, that's been great for me. I can get like 1 million views on Vecna, the lore of Vecna, and people are like, who the hell is this dude? That looks nothing like the guy from the movies.
Show me Jamie Campbell Bower.
Yeah. There's certainly quite a bit of that. Yeah, for search, 100%.
Yeah, there was an interesting kind of hypothesis, because this is all, again, hypothesis that Bob put forward, which I thought was interesting, which was this idea that like, a semi-incidental, but also probably deliberate in some capacity because Wizards had control over some of these things and probably not others. But a semi-incidental sort of sales funnel emerged where you've got Stranger Things putting D&D out there in the cultural zeitgeist in a way that it hadn't been previously. And then people searching it, probably landing on Critical Role, and it kind of pulling you further down the funnel, so to speak, to become an engaged person who's interested in D&D. And then eventually you're like, well, they look like they're having fun, and then fall down into to make the purchase. Because I think at one point, Bob is pointing at like, there's not like a huge spike when one of the seasons of Stranger Things comes out, but there is kind of like an arch upwards on the chart, which suggests more kind of sustained growth even after the season was finished, on a previous season. The other thing that I thought was interesting was the release of the Stranger Things box set, Eddie Munson's campaign. Folks were like, when that released sort of late last year, the thought was, well, that's a bit late. Eddie's not even in this season. But I think maybe that was more deliberate, because if that box had released before Stranger Things Season 4, nobody would have known who Eddie was. There was no emotional connection to that character back then. But now, you remember all those good feelings you had with Eddie back in Season 4 2 years ago.
Eddie is Stranger Things' face of D&D now.
Kind of,
before that, it was a thing that they all did, sort of, in the background. And then it was like, but this is the guy. This is the guy that you want to be. And if you want to be like Eddie, you got to go and play D&D. And I do think I think it has, anecdotally, we've got Matt Boozle in chat saying Stranger Things got me into D&D, wanted to play with my kids, and then it soon became my midlife crisis, and now it's probably my rest of life crisis.
That's awesome.
And I have personal friends who, their friend groups, there's just that thing of, hey, we all watch Stranger Things together, and all it takes is for one of those people to be a D&D player, and they say, oh, well, let's play D&D, I'll run D&D for you, and it just drives people to at least try a one-shot, at least try the Stranger Things, adventure adventure that they've got out there. At least try the box set, that just gives more of that opportunity for conversion.
And the box set is beautiful. The art team knocked it out of the park. I mean, it's so good, and it's so good at evoking. It's obviously not. You don't want 1-to-1 with first edition, by the way. Yeah, not even in the art style, but it's very good at evoking that time period in a lot of ways. I think it's more recency bias because they had a previous starter set, which I'm going to tell you, I wasn't a big fan of.
That's the one my friend played, and it did not convert them into D&D players.
I'm shocked because there's not a lot to that original box set. This one is actually quite a bit meatier, but it's still very hardcore D&D. It's not necessarily something as welcoming as, say, the starter set that came out this year with cards. That is a very easy for new players to understand. I think the Stranger Things box set is more of a collector's item, or meant for hardcore D&D fans who also happen to be Stranger Things. It's kind of a weird creature being both. But I think a lot of it was recency bias. At the time, and I don't actually have insight into this, but at the time this was probably greenlit. Yeah, we just had season 4 of Stranger Things, and it was all Eddie. So let's make a box set about Eddie. If it would have been different, if we made a box set after season 5, probably. Maybe what was the gate? What's the gate that's happening right now? We call it that. No, so the continuation of the adventures of Clearly Everyone's Alive and the missing episode of Stranger Things box set.
Right. Yeah.
So
there you go. There's the real episode 9 is the adventure that we have afterwards.
You have to buy the module on D&D Beyond to get the final.
To get the secret episode. That's actually the truth.
Now we're thinking in portals. Well, speaking of going to D&D Beyond, they released an Unearthed Arcana recently, which in years past might have been at the top of our news section, but Dael doesn't read them, so we buried it all the way down here.
Look.
We have the Mystic subclasses: Monk, Warrior of the Mystic Arts; Paladin, Oath of the Spellguard; Rogue, the Magic Stealer; Warlock, the Vestige Patron. Now, I didn't really read them either, so Todd and Shawn, do you have a report for the group, or did you enjoy them? I don't know, the Monk looked lackluster to me.
I don't take these... I shouldn't say I don't take these seriously. I don't study them and rage about them because these are playtests. And
how are we going to get people to click then, Shawn?
I know. You can say Shawn rages about other people raging about.
Okay.
There are a couple of things where I looked at it and went, oof. The rogue's ability to steal a spell that has just been cast and then do force damage when they do a sneak attack later. Unless you cap that, you're going to... And it doesn't say that the spell they steal doesn't do damage. So now you have the rogue waiting for the wizard in their party to cast the fireball, and then they steal it. It still does all the damage, and now they do an extra, was it 3d6 on their turn. And so that's abusable in a lot of ways if you're not careful. So, there's going to be things like that in any playtest. So, just have fun, read it, try it out, go for it. That's my my thought.
Yeah.
By design for subclasses and classes and playtest materials, particularly with Unearthed Arcana, tend to make things more powerful than they're going to end up being, which is sometimes why people get salty when they get the end result, because it's far easier to scale something down in power than it is to increase its power. Like right now, you can see it's hard for them to increase the power of the Arcane Archer in Unearthed Arcana. I think they're doing a great job. However, they're never going to be Archfey Warlock in terms of being the best archer in D&D in 2024, but it's just how it's going to be. You're going to Eldritch Smite with a bow. You can't beat that. Yeah, I think that to Shawn's point, you're not even stealing the spell. There's no negative for your party. You're just piggybacking off their damage and then doing a crap load of force damage if you get a sneak attack off that turn. It's bursty. And it's definitely like expanding upon kind of the nature of the arcane trickster and stealing spells and that kind of idea, which I don't mind at all. It's interesting that we've seen this in 4th edition and 3rd edition where they take one element of an existing subclass and then blow it out into its own subclass. The monk, it's hard to do partial casters, and a partial monk caster becomes really finicky with action economy, especially the monk. The Visage, I love warlocks. It's pretty powerful, but then it starts butting heads with the improved familiar in terms of bonus action, and again, we have an action economy issue that starts happening if you're trying to use both.
Yeah. The monk to me just looks so lackluster because, and again, I skimmed it, so get in the comments and tell me what I missed when reading this Unearthed Arcana. But it really just seemed to get nothing special at all apart from the fact that it now cast spells. And usually when a class becomes a quartercaster, like the Trickster Rogue, gets new ways to use the Mage Hand. The Eldritch Knight, I believe, in 2014 it did. I can't remember if it is 2024, but it could recall its weapon to its hand and things like that. The Sanguine Thief in Grimhollow gets the ability to use steal blood from enemies and then use that to empower their sangromantic spells. So it gives you spell casting, but it also gives you something that feels like a melding between your core class and the spell casting itself. This monk doesn't really get any of that as far as I can see, At 6th level, it can start converting spell slots for force points or whatever they call it now.
Focus points. It becomes very sorcery in that way.
Yeah,
so there is a kind of a weird that economy for the points. I would have to dig into deeper, and there's always utility to having extra spells. But the Eldritch Knight in 2014 didn't really have much connective tissue at all to being a Gish, which was super weird. It didn't even really function, in my opinion, in 2014 without Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade. Because other than that, you weren't even be able to sacrifice an attack, one of your attacks, for casting a spell. So you just happened to be a dude who was Thor, who could summon your hammer back to you. And that was kind of it. And a couple of spells. That was my kind of complaint. I think the Eldritch Knight is infinitely better now. That paladin in the UA is nasty. It's a nasty paladin who hates wizards and hates sorcerers. And I hate it because I like full casters.
but I love that conceptually, right? It feels like a juicy concept. That's because I'm so slack and I don't read the Unearthed Arcana, even though I should. I just look at them at surface level. I'm like, I like the idea of a paladin that is focused on, sucking the magic out of the area. That's fun. That's ooh, cool, like the eye of a beholder made into a person. And then I like the idea of a rogue that steals magic. But it also means that because I haven't read it, I'm just like, yeah, no, that sounds good, without seeing any of those flaws that you've described with the rogue.
But they've been really great about responding to the playtest. That's the thing, is rather quickly too. So give them your feedback, because they're just everyone giving them feedback on those surveys is only going to make a better game. And they are wildly talented designers over at D&D right now, and they're trying new stuff. Spell thief, 100%. I want to be a spell thief. I want to see another sorcerer. I want to see a wizard's face when I take his magic from him.
Yeah,
I think that's great. I think the
What if we made
great.
counterspell into a person?
Yeah. And the paladin gets counterspell. And he can hit you at the same time. He hits you as a reaction when you cast the spell, and then can cast counterspell on the spell that you cast. It's nasty stuff.
See? And I just don't think that the Warrior of Mystic Arts has that kind of juice of concept to it, as far as
I think it probably needs a little bit more work in identity.
And I think the Vestige Warlock is cool as an idea, right? There's this dying god who you have tied yourself to. And so what do you do? And it really harkens back for me to the Warden, the 4th edition, because I played a Warden for a long, long time, and we got the Spirit Companion, and you just send that Spirit Companion out and they do fun things and you stand back and watch. And it's really a cool class to play, and that's what the vibes I got for this one.
Yeah, and the Vestige is probably my favorite, and plus the RP. The Warlocks already have built-in RP in terms of hey, you're indebted to this entity. Great, easy to jump in and start role-playing that. But then you have a Vestige. I don't know if you like Moon Knight, but Khonshu is just hanging out with you, or I mean, whatever. The skull from Planescape. To have the thing that you're drawing magic from floating around with you. Oh my God, the role-playing opportunities with that alone. And it's probably has a chip on its shoulder because it's a dying god. So a little snarky, I can see the role playing with the Vestige immediately. And it's got some nasty emanations and a couple other things it can do that are really great. I just immediately went to how many creatures on the battlefield can I make my dungeon master want to kill me? Because every time you add a pet class and then you add a familiar to that, you're just it's a whole nother game. Everyone gets a turn. But I think it's really cool. I think it's all good concepts.
Well, speaking of good concepts, last little scrap of news I'm going to sneak in here is actually some Games Workshop news. If you're not familiar, Games Workshop are the Wizards of the Coast of Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar. They're kind of the gorilla in the room for the miniature wargaming.
The gorilla in the room. I've not heard that, and I love it.
The 10,000-pound gorilla. You never heard that?
No, I've heard 10,000
but
I love it.
Yeah, thank you, Todd.
He's next to the elephant in the room.
Exactly. We talk about the gorilla all the time. We never talk about the elephant. That's their dichotomy. Sorry, elephant. The elephant's called Bruno. Anyway, The news from Games Workshop and how this is relevant to tabletop RPGs, it's almost not. But I thought it was neat because it's still part of the tabletop community. They had a half-year report for their period ending November 30, 2025. And they reported, I thought this was interesting, that sales through retailers, such as game shops, and this doesn't include Games Workshop-owned stores, I don't believe, so just independent game shops and other retailers, constituted 80% of Games Workshop products sold during that period in North America, which is kind of super surprising in this world of like retreating away from retailers and trying to go direct sales. That was kind of the sense I feel that we were getting previously from a lot of larger corporations, you know, direct sales through D&D Beyond, for example, as opposed to going and pre-ordering in your local game shop. And I thought, you know, Warhammer is a very different product to a tabletop RPG. Warhammer is innately a physical product, right? Whether it's tabletop RPGs can be digital because they could be PDFs or something. So this is kind of not really comparing apples and apples, but I still thought it was interesting in sort of demonstrating the role of independent retailers in the tabletop hobby and how they're still an important space for bringing folks into
and you know
tabletop.
What? Much like apples and oranges sit next to each other at the grocery store,
Yeah.
so too do TTRPGs and wargaming minis.
There you go.
At the grocery store? You get what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I got it.
It's much harder for, I think, the bowling data. I think a lot more people bowl in person than they do digitally. That's how I think of But Games Workshop is just, they obey their own freaking rules, in my opinion, because like it's such a massive fandom. They've come out with so many good video games. I played Warhammer Online, the MMO, wonderfully written, great PvP at the time. For those that know, most of the PvP design team from World of Warcraft moved over to Warhammer Online, and they just killed it. It was such a fun game. But like, I remember I had my honeymoon in Edinburgh, and there's a Games Workshop on the King's Mile right in the center of all the tourists, and there's no reason. No tourist is buying they're just not buying more Warhammer. They're just not. But they have the money to just be there in like the most posh shopping areas in London and Edinburgh because they can. And they're full. People buying miniatures and playing. So
I beg to differ, Todd. I'm going over to the UK in later this year, and one of the stops that we have that I keep joking about being excited with my wife is Warhammer World. Warhammer World! Yay! Yes, there's a Warhammer World.
The things Tori has to put up with.
It's in Nottingham. And then the second interesting thing about this was that during the report, Games Workshop expressed their stance against AI. Kevin Roundtree, the CEO, stating, quote, "We do not allow AI-generated content or AI to be used in our design processes or its unauthorized use outside of Games Workshop." For end quote, for example, with publishing partners and licensing partners, that sort of thing. And then also said, quote, "We will be maintaining a strong commitment to protect our intellectual property and respect our human creators," end quote. Now, putting that in context a little bit, he did say that, the company is currently unimpressed with AI and its tools at the moment. They've got an open mind about it, but don't currently see a use for it. And just, I thought, as another company in the tabletop space, I think Games Workshop being against AI is a good and strong pillar.
And it makes a lot of sense because as a company, they have a long and powerful history of being very protective and jealous over their IP. You know what I mean? Like they are hardcore about protecting their IP.
Totally.
And so it feels a little bit like one of those, like Disney versus the governor of Florida, where I'm like, I'm not sure I'm 100% on your side, but I'm glad that in this battle, you're on the side I'm on.
Yes. Yeah. Totally. Well, I think AI has really started to come into the board game space a lot. I won't name names and I can't think of them off the top of my head anyway, but I know that there's a lot of large board game publishers that are really using AI to generate art and things in the game that they're making. I just think it sets a really good example that helps support the pillar of supporting creatives in the tabletop space in general. And then I'm going to treat this as a really quick email because I know the answer from Dael and Shawn. This is really just a friendship test for Todd and I. Tobias emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com and asked, how specific do you prefer your miniatures to be when you're playing a tabletop role-playing game? And there are 4 brackets here that Tobias suggested and then I added to. Bracket 1, specific. The mini has to represent exactly what it is, and when you describe the character or the monster, it looks like the mini. Close enough. A goblin with a bow could represent an elven ranger, and it's close enough. You get the idea. Abstract. A representative miniature, such as a class icon, a character portrait on a token, or something like that. Or the final category, which I've called Shawn, which is a meeple, a piece of candy, a lint, anything you've got lying around. A trophy for a big monster. Where do you fall, Todd, on this list?
This is just a psychology issue. I like having very specific minis for my player's mini.
Okay.
It makes me bleed internally if someone has to use a skeleton with a bow instead of a goblin with a bow. I'm screaming. I am the woman from Clue. Just pain.
Flames on the side of my face.
On the side of my face. Problem is, we don't have an infinite amount of frickin' minis that are unless you're using Hero Forge, which is not a plug for Hero Forge, but I plugged them. But like, unless you have and that's why I love sometimes you can get like an entire army of goblins and they do 8 billion things and they have an axe and they have a bow and they have all that stuff. And I would prefer that. It does break my soul when I use something that is not that creature. I'd rather use a meatball to represent it than something that is clearly not. Because I've seen confusion around the table like, oh, wait, is that a skeleton and a goblin? I'm like, it's a goblin. I'm like, okay, why are we using a mini? If I'm now confusing the shit out of you instead of like a piece of meat.
Are you a preferred no mini person? Like if you are like trying to map out, and I do like mapping out combat. Sometimes I like Theater of the Mind, but I also like mapping things out because you'll find unexpected things about combat, and especially it kind of makes it a sport-like event. If you're doing a live play show, I think that's really fun. Sure. But if you're doing a show like Critical Role, it has to look like the thing. If you're doing a live play show, I kind of feel like it still has to look like the thing. Otherwise, deeply confusing. So I don't love it. But you only have so much money in this world. Yes. It's an expensive hobby. If the Dungeon Master doesn't have 20 Goblin Archers, I'm not going to scream at him. I'm going to secretly judge him. But I mean, Massive Darkness, it's a good source of a lot of goblins if you need them. It's a board game, but it is expensive, I'll admit. I would look forward to Shawn's live play, Dungeons and Bologna.
Why
bologna?
Yeah.
I don't know. Shawn, do you eat bologna?
I don't. Although, as we have said many times, there was a D&D branded bologna in Spain.
That's true.
A few years ago.
Wow.
I think D&D hot dogs makes a lot of sense because you can theme as any monster you want to.
Exactly.
As long as it's long and skinny. Oh, you can chop it up, I guess.
Yeah, we're chopping things up. Like this can be owlbear. Yeah. Owlbear hot dogs.
Think of it like cabanossi, you know?
Dael, do you have a preference on the miniatures? I feel like you're the one I'm more vague about, but I suspect not.
I mean, look, I would love in an ideal world to have exactly the thing, but when it comes down to it, when it comes down to crunch time and I'm having to prioritize, I don't care. I love a 2D standee. I'll get as close as I can. I'm a big fan of just some like index cards that say goblin, bow, and that's it. I'll use what I can. I keep being drawn to the idea of Questing Beast once did a video ages ago, years and years ago, where it was just using Magic the Gathering cards and using like one of those pin like badge punch things to punch out circles from the Magic the Gathering art and then just basically like sticking them to a little mini base and using those. Yeah. That's
a good idea.
I know, right?
Well, there's the campaign coins that D&D came out with where you put a sticker on a really heavy piece of plastic. I don't know if that took off though.
But I'm the target audience.
You're the target audience.
Shawn, what would you use? Is bologna a good meat? Are there better meats to use for miniatures? You
have to go with the straight sugar. You have to go. Hershey's Kisses are great. Reese's Cups are great
gummy
for
bears,
large.
gummy worms.
Yep, gummy stuff, good. The Starbursts, not bad. If someone's not into chocolate, the Starbursts work very well. Yeah, I would love, as everyone said, to make the perfect mini. And I have a ton of minis that were sort of given to me over the years that are just sitting in the closet doing nothing. And if I'm really going to run something that's important for visuals, I'll dig through that box until I find the right thing. But then I look at the clock and I say, and unless I'm going to add 16 hours to this day, I have to stop this.
Yeah.
Fair.
You know what? You bring up a good point, because I didn't even think of this. Like, money is one factor in the minis. The other factor is, where do you keep them? Where do you store them all? I don't know what to do. This is all my storage space. My place is tiny. Where am I going to keep them? I can't deal with that stress.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I have a whole linen closet in my house that is not a linen closet. It's just filled with Kickstarter board games, filled with miniatures, and I use the original Kickstarter page of that game as a catalog for all my miniatures. Whenever I'm like, did The Witcher have anything for this? And I'll go like look at it. Or did Mythic Battles have anything for this? Yeah, look, it's absolutely expensive, but you don't need all those dice. That's all I'm going to say. I
have a very rare Elminster mini that it was just like in the bottom of my bag, and I'd pull it out at conventions and be like, and here's the wizard. And someone finally said, do you know how much that's worth? And I'm like, what? They're like, that mini? I'm like, no. And so he told me that he's no longer sitting at the bottom of my bag. He's now.
Yeah. I recently had a similar issue. I was like, wait, that thing's $3,000? I'm like, oh God. Like, I have like the BioShock Murder of Crows vial from when they sent it to like reporters and stuff.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. I looked up on eBay. I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And wrap that in like plastic.
Well, speaking of wondering what we're doing, what are we still doing here? We're over time. It's time to end this episode, but you can catch us.
Go home.
Next
2 hours.
week, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. If you want to catch us live on Twitch, /Ghostfire_official, or that is 10 a.m. on a Tuesday if you're Australian East Coast, or you just catch us on YouTube. Leave the like, leave the thumbs and the stars, the stuff, the comments. Comment down below. Tell us everything we got wrong, because that's my favorite type of comment to read. I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill, Todd Kenrick, Shawn Merwin, and we will be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-da.